Hello, welcome to Chess with Simon. I'm Simon. I just fancied having a 30-minute chess game. I'm just trying to play interesting, beautiful chess. Now, I'm not sure bishop f4 was really what I had in mind. Should we play c5 on the basis that it's more likely to be interesting? What if we play queen b6? Look, it's attacking the b2 pawn. Isn't that going to at least force white to make some decisions? Okay, so now my theory is that this is creating weak dark squares on the queen side, and I think the way I want to try to exploit that is to fianchetto my king's bishop. Although there are other ways of doing that, I just think it gives me more reason to fianchetto my king's bishop. What if I played knight c6? Well, I'm sure I will at some point, eh? Let's just fianchetto the king's bishop and get castled. And I assume white will just develop on the king's side at some point, possibly taking on c5, although I'm not sure if that will happen and if that's a good idea now, because already there are ideas of playing knight h5. So, question, if I take on d4, if the knight takes, there's no fork. If the pawn takes, so there's probably not any tactics immediately, so I'm not so sure on knight c6. Oh, I can play knight c6 because there isn't, there's no d5 now. What do we fear after knight c6? Don't think we fear much, do we? There's no d5. Knight c6 looks like a fairly good move to me. Now the problem for white is that the d4 pawn is attacked 3 times. Could take on c5, but I distrust that because it's opening that lovely diagonal onto the rook. I'm not saying it's losing, but positionally it's questionable. I mean, we've used very little time. I've used 1.5 minutes. My opponent's used just over a minute, and already we've made a lot of decisions. I mean, the game could possibly be won and lost in the next 3 or 4 moves, I think, by the look of it. What do I recommend for white? It's hard to know what to recommend, actually. You've got to defend that d pawn. c3? Doesn't look great, does it? c3. Okay, so if I think white's best move is c3, what am I going to do about that at c3? Well, I could castle. I mean, castling can't be wrong. Oh, he's played c3, look. I could castle, or I could try to irritate the pawn on c3. I suppose rook c1 is going to come soon, which would not be bad at all. How about things like d6 and e5? How about knight h5? I just don't think castling can be wrong. I guess now the king's bishop gets developed. Best guess, d3. And then I think, oh, well. So that's not a bad move at all. I assume my queen is going back to d8. I don't think there's even much choice about that. So, other squares, I think, put the queen in some danger. Or just lose it. I wonder if he'll take on c5. Has to be put into consideration. I have to say, I think the refutation of that is knight e4, which is a really good move. So I think what my respected opponent will do is bishop d3. Then maybe I want to play d5, but I think a good response to that is knight e4. Maybe b5? Maybe d6 and then b5? I've not quite got the activity I need to cause white problems, but maybe that's just how it goes as black. Maybe at this stage in the game as black, you should be happy with what looks to me like a dynamic equality. I mean, what's the computer going to say? Who knows? The computer's going to say that black is okay. I mean, the one I suppose that's interesting is pawn d5. Okay, pawn d5. Knight takes pawn. Queen takes knight. Bishop takes c3 check. Wins. Because I've won the rook on the end. So you can't do it. Which I think underlines the dynamism. You know, black's sort of playing a Grunfeld, but not a Grunfeld. It's got a lot of characteristics that are similar to the Grunfeld. That sort of potential of the bishop on the long diagonal, but it's not really Grunfeld. Yeah, I mean, black hasn't played d5, for instance. I suppose bishop d3, knight d5, and then rook c1, takes on f4, pawn takes on f4, and actually in that line the d4 pawn would fall because it's only defended twice and it's attacked 3 times. After bishop e2, the d4 pawn wouldn't fall. I quite like knight d5 as a move. In fact, white is somewhat what's the word? White's a little bit poorly coordinated, a little bit unharmonious. I mean, knight c4 was a decent move, but now what? I think bishop e2 is correct. Bishop e2, bishop e2, knight d5, rook c1. b5. Oh, he's played rook c1 straight away. Great. What do we think about b5 and then queen a5? The question is whether I should play d6 first or indeed take. Maybe I should take. Maybe knight d5. You know, there's so many interesting options. Okay, let's think really hard now. Okay, what am I worried about? I'm a little worried about white taking on c5, although I think knight e4 is still a good move. I'm a little worried now about push d5, pawn d5. And I think I'm right to be. I could play, should we just play d5? For some reason I just want to play d5, and then if white moves the knight to e5, I think I want to swap. Yeah. I don't think it's a killer move, but I don't really want to take on d4 because I think white will play e takes d and then it allows the bishop to come back and defend, and I don't really want that. Maybe I don't take this. Maybe I just play queen a5 and say I'm threatening the pawn, and maybe I'm shaping up to play knight e4. Yeah, I like that. I like that. Yeah, I really like that. The point really here is that the dark square bishop is outside the pawn chain, and so can't really help. I mean, what do we expect here? Bishop d3, then I'm picking up a pawn. Now, that might trap my queen after rook a1, so I have to be careful. But it also might not. I mean, in this position, takes on a2, rook a1, queen b2 is the only move, knight d3. Okay, well, that's not very complicated, is it? We've got to take that back. Now what? Well, actually, you know what? Now, I like what black's doing. Oh, knight e4 with tempo. Feels tempting, doesn't it? Team. Knight e4, queen c2, bishop f5, bishop d3. Takes on d4, pawn takes on d4. Okay, I'm going to do this instinctively. It's probably wrong. Knight e4. Now, okay. So one thing I could do here, so bishop f5 looks good, but then bishop d3, but maybe that's just fine. Then maybe I take on d4 and then I play c5. Oh, actually, how about this? I play bishop g4 with a view to taking the knight and winning the d4 pawn. Maybe it's that simple. I think bishop g4 is a really nice move, because I think what I'm going to try for here, let's see what happens. Bishop e2, takes on f3, takes on f3, takes on d4. Takes on e4. Queen takes c3, check, queen takes, pawn takes, and then I've made a mess. So maybe it's a bit more complicated than I thought it was. Isn't that always the case? So I take on d4, e takes on d4, I take the knight, bishop takes. No, I think this is going to work, guys. I think this is going to work. I think what we're going to do is, okay, I take on d4, e takes d4. I take the knight, bishop takes. I take on d4 with the bishop. Bishop takes on e4, pawn takes on e4, queen takes on e4, bishop takes c3 check. Alright, I think this wins a pawn. Except the knight can take now. I've bungled it. That's hilarious. So the knight can take, which means I've bungled it, except I haven't, because I can take the bishop, and then I think if the knight takes, then c3 falls. Okay. Knight takes d4, bishop takes e2, knight takes e2. Oh, that's colourful. It may be correct. It may be correct, it may not be correct, but it's different. So, I mean, immediately queen b6 feels likely to me. So should we play the move that feels likely? Yeah, queen b6 is a good move. I like queen b6. So now there's no c takes d. There must be e takes. Must be e takes. And then after e takes, okay, let's see what we got. Bishop takes on f3, bishop takes on f3, knight takes on c3, queen takes on c3, bishop takes on d4, queen goes somewhere, bishop takes on f2 check. That's 3 pawns for a piece. So tempting, so amusing, so much fun, but probably wrong. So here's what I'm thinking. Bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3, knight takes c3, queen takes c3, bishop takes d4, queen d2, defending the f2 square, and the pawn on b4. White wins. So it's not a great idea, is it, to throw the game away just for no reason. What's going on strategically? I mean, what are we really looking at here? I want to play a5, do I? Yeah, I want to play a5. Why? Oh, you know, why not? Let's play a5. Okay, so the idea here is just a new idea. Well, firstly, it's attacking b4 twice, so white has to take action. My best guess is that the action that will be taken will be pawn a3, at which point I will take on b4, white will take on b4, I will play rook a3, and white will be in crisis because the c3 pawn is attacked twice and defended twice, but the queen's first, so it's all very tricky. Maybe black will play bishop d2, and that's a good move. So after bishop d2, I'll do something else. After bishop d2. So the sequence I'm currently anticipating is pawn a3, a takes b, a takes b, rook a3, bishop d2. Probably rook f a8 with a view to playing rook a2 and winning the bishop on d2. maybe after liquidating the knight on f3. I quite like that. Yeah, that looks good. So this is what I now think is going to happen. Pawn a3, a takes b4, a takes b4, rook a3, bishop d2, rook f a8, castle, bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3, rook a2, queen moves somewhere, and then the knight takes on d2, winning a piece. I like that. What could black do to spoil my fun? Well, I don't think black's going to take on a5, because if I take back with the queen, the a2 pawn is a problem, and the d4 pawn is also weak, because I might take on f3 and then take on d4 because the c pawn is pinned. So I think taking on a5 is bad. I think doing nothing is bad. So I think castling seems to drop at least a pawn, at least the b4 pawn. Although, I mean, it's complicated, but castle, a takes b4, c takes b4, queen takes b4, queen takes c6. Rook takes a2. Then there's no queen takes d5 because you take on e2 and the e4 knight is defended. So I don't think castling is good. I mean, another thing I could do after castling is just play something like rook fc8. But I don't like that so much. I think I'd rather take on b4. This actually is a lovely game. I mean, it's an interesting game. I can't remember how it started. Oh, it started like a sort of London system, didn't it? Yeah. Well, how about that? Come on, should we just play what we thought we'd play? Yeah. Come on, let's just rack out the moves. I mean, not from a place of arrogance, but just from a place of that's what we're going to play. Okay, so that was quite quickly done. So let's just pretend that the force is strong within us. Rook f8. So now you can't castle because I believe that rook a2 wins the bishop. So white needs a move, and that move is not castling, I don't think. What is black's threat? Black's threat is rook a2, which is uncomfortable. Because even if it's not immediately winning the bishop, there could be a follow-up. It could be the queen could get pushed around somewhere else, or even trapped. I mean, for instance, in this position, rook a2, queen b3, rook a3, queen d1, but then you can take on c3 with the knight, which effectively wins, I think, because I think white's position is going to collapse then. Should we see where our opponent's from? Hello there. Hi. India. 1869 Rapid. We don't know where in India. Playing a good amount of chess. That's what I like to see. Okay. Maybe I'll pop you a message afterwards just to say that I've done this, and we can, stay in touch. Okay, this instinctively looks awkward. I'm not saying it's wrong, but what do you do about rook a2 and then taking on f2? I think that's really, really, really nice for black. And taking on f2 and then probably also after the rook moves, knight d3 wins. I think that's the end, actually. I don't think we need to overthink this, to be honest with you. I mean, another slightly showboaty trick would be to take on f2 with the knight now. If the king takes, rook a2 wins, but of course the queen can take. So that's wrong. Okay, let's push the queen around. So this is sort of, I think, something in common with the Grunfeld defence, actually. Queen quickly backs off. Okay, so this was, I think, a good move in the position. So knight f2, rook f1. There's no knight d3 because the queen takes it now, but the knight can return to e4 with essentially a 1 position. Another thing I suppose black could do is take with the rook on f2. Woof! And then maybe just double the rooks on the 7th rank. I mean, another thing black could do is play bishop f5 with a view to a discovered attack on the queen. I suppose then white's in the business of playing bishop c2, and then black's in the business of taking on c3, which is very unpleasant for white because the queen's hit. So it could be, so bishop f5, what about knight h4? Again, I think black takes on c3. Queen's double attacked. I think that's very, very hard for white to deal with because you can't take the knight on c3 with a rook because you lose the queen. What about rook f2? What's wrong with rook f2? Rook f2. Queen takes e4, pawn takes e4, king takes f2, pawn takes f3. Fine. Black wins. The point about rook f2 is it's also threatening rook g2, just hoovering through the sort of 7th rank. I think bishop f5 is more powerful. What if the queen just moves to b3? And then we play rook a3, everything's coming with tempo. Yeah. I'm doing this. To be honest, I think at this point everything wins. But after knight h4, I think there's also rook f2, knight f5, knight h1. Looks like it's winning. I think I'm expecting bishop c2 here, and then I'm going to take on c3. So the sequence best guess is bishop c2, knight c3, attacks the queen, queen b3, rook 8, a3 wins. So the issue really here is it's trapping the queen. It's a bit early to say where did white go wrong, but where did white go wrong? I don't know particularly. Maybe... actually, I didn't like b3 on move 4. Oddly, I think b3 on move 4 might have been part of the problem. Let's just have a quick look at that position. I didn't like this. I think there might have been an alternative like queen c1. Or playing the Queen's Gambit for white. Just an idea. Okay. We're here. What if... So if white just castles, then bishop c3 hits the queen. I think it's the same sequence, isn't it? If white castles, knight c3 hits the queen twice. Ooh, queen b3, rook 8 a3. And again, a queen's falling for a rook in that line. I mean, also if white castles, you can just do things like knight g3, winning an exchange. What black's tried to do here is, I guess, just play actively. It doesn't always work. I mean, particularly as black. Quite rightly, white's having a good old think here. I mean, after bishop c2, you can take it with a rook, and then I suppose rook takes. Then again, you do things like knight c3, and the rook can't take it because it's pinned against the queen. And I guess you get the exchange back, but I don't think that's as strong as some of these lines that trap the queen. What do you reckon, boss? What do you reckon? I think what helped me was just to make a bunch of moves with tempo. You know, rook a2 was really nice with tempo. Here. You know, this with tempo. Coming onto the 7th rank. But also this, you know, rook f a8 sort of does two jobs. It sort of defends the rook and it prepares rook a2. And it also just, I suppose, just keeps control of that open file, which, if white was castled, white could play rook a1. And, well, I mean, no, because the pawn on c3 drops, but sort of, if we imagine the pawn on c3 was defended. With the idea of sort of, well, even then, yeah, the pawn, no, even then, actually, the pawn on c3 doesn't drop. So in this position, if white's castled, there is rook a1, because you can't take with the knight, because then you drop the rook on a3. You can't take with the rook, and then you drop the rook on a8. So actually, if white was castled, then white could play rook a1 here and just take out all the pressure on that open file. I mean, I suppose, you know, who knows? Black could think about playing queen a7 and try to keep something on that file. You know, so if white was castled, rook a1, queen a7, rook takes, queen takes, queen takes, rook takes, and now the c3 pawn is attacked. Black's probably still quite a bit better. Okay. Oh. So what's happened here? White has given up his queen. for the rook. Okay, so what do we think of that? I suppose white's going to castle, yeah. So now let's just take a breather, party people. We've got a rook for a queen. We have a backward pawn on c3. It's always good to see the positional feature, you know. We're fine on time. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put the queen on a6 with the idea of coming to d3, and there's no bishop e2 to push it off. And the nice thing about d3, I'm not sure d3 is perfect, but I'm trying to win the c pawn. Perhaps I should be trying to do something a bit more dramatic, but actually there's no immediate checkmate. I mean, white's king is safe. In a funny old way, I think better to think of this as sort of an endgame. Like, if this was an endgame, I mean, A, black's pawn structure's better, but B, black has a queen instead of a rook, which makes all the difference because the mobility is so much greater. So I'm claiming that pawn is arduous to defend. And actually, I didn't see this at the time, but by playing queen a6, I've stopped c4. Okay, so making some space. We're going to play queen d3. Is that a good move? Well, we're about to find out, I think. Queen d3. What about, I mean, another thing we could do is just double on the 7th rank and just try to take on f2, but you can defend with a bishop. Rook a3, does rook a3 win the pawn? You know what? I'm going to play rook a3. It's a bit wimpy, but I think it's just sort of forcing bishop d2, which I'll exchange. Okay. I mean, not necessarily wrong. I suppose the critique would be it's sort of, you get to bother the bishop, but you wonder if that creates air around the king, creates weakness in the king's shelter. So, okay. I think white might be trying to say, can he win on time here? I strongly suspect the answer to that question is no. Okay, bishop d7. The problem is knight e5 gets to irritate the bishop. Do I want to take with my bishop? Well, probably. Gives me a slight dark square weakness, but there's nothing to exploit it. There's no queen to exploit it. You know, the bishop can sit on, yeah, okay, fine. So now what happens after queen d3? Queen d3 looks like it's going to create crisis because I'm attacking the bishop on d2. There's no bishop e2 because it loses the bishop. There's no bishop c2 because it loses the knight. You can't play knight e1 because it loses the bishop. So what will white do if I play queen d3? Probably give up move the bishop, I think, and give up the c3 pawn. Hi there. So I think that dark square bishop's going to move now. Back to f4 perhaps, and then I think I take on c3. with a view to irritating the light squared bishop and possibly picking up the knight. That's the sort of long-term idea. What do we think of this game? Ooh. Dark square bishop backs off. So now we can take on c3. I think there's going to be a big bunch of exchanges on c3 here. But then I think d4 is going to fall afterwards. Am I missing something here? So when I take on c3, still bishop c2 doesn't win anything because I can just take on f3. Or indeed, check on e2. Not scared. I'm expecting bishop takes, rook takes, queen takes, and then another pawn to fall. This is the sort of endgame philosophy, really, which is it's just an endgame. Both of those dark squared pawns are going to fall now because they can't be defended. And once those dark squared pawns have fallen, it's really, black has a clear plan, really, which is just a queen, a pawn in the centre. Okay, I'm going to put my pawns on dark squares. I'm going to try and land a queen on g1. Just see if I can pull off a naughty sort of checkmate. If I can lure that rook off the back rank, yeah, okay. There are quite a few ways to win this chess game. Okay, why don't we just keep on going? I'm just keeping on going. That bishop's pinned. Okay, what I could do is now just liquidate everything and just win the pawn endgame. That's a bit wrong, isn't it? I mean, better probably to take the bishops off and then just keep the queen. Is there nothing more dramatic? Is there anything beautiful I can do here? What does beautiful look like? Queen d4 check. Alright, let's just see if there's anything after queen d4. I suspect there's not. I suspect just king f1 is fine. After king f1, okay. Okay, I'm just going to get this over with. I don't think... I think when it's so clearly won, I'm not sure how interesting it is, really. Okay, let's do some math here. Let's find the quickest win possible. The quickest win possible. So what I'm aiming for is pawn e5, pawn d4, I think is checkmate. Pawn e5, f4 is the defense. Is there a quicker one? How about pawn d4, you can take it. Okay, come on. Let's do the math, party people. Although he may just resign. He may get bored, and I'd understand that. Pawn e4. Well, after pawn f4, we just take it with check. Come on. Pawn f4. We take it with check. Thank you for an interesting game. That was fun. Should we see what the analysis says? Checking for mistakes. The analysis says, no blunders, no mistakes, no missed wins. How very dull of me. Let's have a look at the game report. What opening was this? London system, right? It was a sort of London system. Okay. So I suppose the real question is, where could white have improved? Yeah, the engine doesn't particularly like that, but it doesn't think it's the end of days. I think strategically it's a bit, doesn't like this move, look, this knight move. Already this knight move's a problem. Should have taken, okay. This was a star move, yeah, correct it was. This was a star move. This was okay, preferred d6. Yeah, but I didn't like takes on c5, takes on c5, takes the queens off, but alright. This was a star move, yep. This was okay, better to take the knight. Well, I understand that, but I like keeping it on. So it liked white's exchange, likes this, doesn't like this, wants to take the pawn. He thinks taking the pawn's a lot better. We should look at that. Taking the pawn. B4 it wants, but what about this? C5. And here it really likes black, and I can see why. And actually I was thinking of that kind of stuff. You know, having that extra c pawn allows you to sort of play the Queen's Gambit reversed twice. Okay. So, alright, so it didn't like my bishop g4 or that. It liked that. Didn't like that. Like that. Yeah, I really like that. Look at that. You see, this computer's got taste. Really like that. Really like that. Gosh, I thought that was a bad move. No, I didn't like that. I think that's the losing move. I mean, it's already gone, but that's really bad. Yeah. Didn't like that. Well, it's gone from 6 to black to 5 to black. I'm just... it wants to take with the rook. Look on f2. It wants to take with the rook on f2. I get that. We did talk about that, didn't we? And then it doesn't particularly like giving up the queen at that point. It's over. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed that. I've enjoyed that, and hope to see you all soon.